And good morning, Genla. And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us today. And welcome to everyone online. Geshe-la is in a new venue, and today we're in a new venue, but it's the same Rice Seedling class. So we'll begin with our prayers as usual. The link is in the chat box. To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one that's gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one omnipotent, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans to you, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, shock humaniac, prostrate, make offering, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With a supreme science, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, bringing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash, a lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed you, flowers through mountains, for thy song. So good land and offer to you, may all things enjoy this pure venerable holy grace. In the space of your true body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kandiyatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas of Dharma and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oya, la sogen.
Oh yeah.
뭐야, 리사이스라. 뭐야, 다 리사. 전에 다 왔어. 당하라도 단다 토베 밀리티. 그와 니바 가시. 니나 대시와. 니 지글라와. 대답이 텐조. 슈트발이야 대시 콤베. 튕기 말루바 사베. 밀리디. 텐도 네게시 마이바르. 라와. 아니, 유통도시단 지벌 유아인베. 대외장 다른 교와치마. 펜시기. 용주디 다장 들은 모임에 대체도 르다 셈야 가가시네 셈디 트러블시네 돈이 껴랑코디 아니 던돌라 소베 네 속에 껴와 말로와 사담이 땡셔버시 슈트베 땡시 토버시 아섬 대체도 대주 고슴비 코네 샬라 차와 반데 진리지 페버투바 자기 인사베 기부 총회 삼로든 줄에 깨보라 야 대체도 쇼냐기 삼사 삼르시 거고도야 대체라.
So here, this human life that we have obtained right now is something we should recognize to be extremely precious, but also quite difficult to obtain. And this is something which is easily destroyed, is easily lost. And so right now we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions to be able to practice the Dharma or accomplish any aim that we might want. But this life right now that we have is so short. It's such a short period of time when we look at all of the future lives that we will have to take. And at some point, when our body and mind separate, we are going to have to take another rebirth. And so, in order to ensure that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god and don't fall down into the lower realms, we begin with the kind of contemplation that we should abandon harming all other sentient beings, abandon those kinds of acts that would lead to such a rebirth. So this is the kind of contemplation for the being of small scope, recognizing that at the very least, we don't want to fall into the lower realms, but gain a good rebirth in the future.
뭐야, 전에 전에 깨와치마 슈트베 미 르르데 롤하다 미 르데 케버션시 깨와네 깨와 토바샤고 요소로와 대한테네 하다 미 깨와테야 뜻다도 내성이 동안에 타로치 마임베로와 얘네 거에 깨와래 라라 라완베바 kumbuidole che kube tungeji rangshi chele madeba imbe ene koa korme kuba leda nyumba wange rala rawame ba kumbuidole che kuba tisido tungeji kuba imbe tile taro che kuyo san tile taro kyude nga o nyamdo nga rawa wanjen bata ene nga cho shen cho se shakdange samli wange le gyawada mikiwe le sada ene koa kyawa imbe tile taro che kuyo san 대체도 안에 전년기 삼사야 삼로 등지 단에 들었다고도 야.
So then, in the next life, even if we are to gain the kind of body or life as a human or a god to be able to do the Dharma, we should have this kind of thought that we want to gain this again and again to be able to continue to practice. But even if we gain such a good rebirth, it's not something that is some kind of a definite freedom. We can still fall into the lower realms because we are still taking up aggregates and casting them off due to the control of our karma and aggregates. And so, or karma and afflictions. And so therefore, recognizing this kind of cycle that none of that is beyond the nature of suffering, we wish to get out of that uncontrolled cycle of rebirth that is driven by this holding to a sense of an I, and a kind of independent or autonomous I, which then out of that grasping at an I, we create various karmas and in turn cycle in rebirth. And so this is the kind of contemplation of a being of middling scope, saying, I need to get freed from that kind of cycle. I need to abandon the causes of that such that I can gain a definite freedom.
뭐야? 전에 타르와 토바테야 라치부 타르와 토바 그 삼로타나 토바체나 테 마라부 타샤이 베로와 소소체데 파다마다 다녀다니 둘러 서바 기때네 가르소라 사자이나 테네 펜젤로 라게네 가르소라 테로서로다 사자이나 테네 부부줄라 서바 가레나 라라 가 제바요나 대타부 마주 대타부 Tezu Sama, Tanda Samlamata, the Rachibu Samlata, the Marabresam. They are said they Ragayan to Kawa, you test a Maiba, Tintin Cabaret, Shaggy Samlatan, Chizo Samatam Ralia, Pendo to get Rachibu in it, Subutabe to get Rala Saya, Toya, Koya, Soba, or the Kokosama, me, Shandagi, Tiletene, so there you are. Chigichilia, Tungi to Rochingas or Kashag Lamgas or Kashag, Shingatab Saya, the Kashag to Locha, Tingi Soachity or Tintin Cabarchas. The Chizo Koran, the Ralia, Joy, and Gekati Chambuchi, something. They are said this on my but Kyawa Toma Beva Sonja, Kyawa Mabuchela Pama, Yandela Soba. Shibukavni Ashenda Shen Soja, Simja de Rangi Pata Mata, Kati Chishu de Jura, Nama Majura in de Jura in Samsa, Yawachi Meba, Simja Tamje, Rala Tijan Pamanashi, Jura in Sam, Jada Chedo, any church in the church room, Sanji Kawana Soba to the Tobachene, the Datumele Trawa Chetum Gwichi some the Samluchi. I could say Shanji Samlutandi. Oh, tuni shenda pama cheba da tuni cheba tinde medaya. Simje chama sosu nashi. Tewa dola tunge meduba chama chiba re sam. Rangi tewa tukuba da tunge sewa kuba te shindu shenda ki tunge te seko re sam. Tewa de rangi neba yoba shende neba yona tuku re sam. Chunju le somba nashi tunge yinchi te se shaas. Shenji tewa yina te rangi tewa nashi tewa yinbe chine tubna tubro chebu re sa. Oh, ti indiko. Shen dewa rang dewa dola tunge medo shen dewa dola tunge medo banya bayimbe rangi tunge se she dewa tukwa shendu shen la ya teni tunge se ya da dewa tukwa roba che kure samsa samli chik tani roa ti che do tende samma che tunge ge sanje che koba toba cha kure samsa oni ya tesa mai ba rang da shen che na rang ge che wa chi te ta nor sha sam roa Ragi Tituli Samlataya Rachi Banchibate, Dorshasa, Toma Mebana Rachi Banchibare, Tandabatoka, Yagashike to Amara, Raya Shike Chayomara. Das Samlokora Norshasam, Tagbe Shencheba, Toma Mebana Rake, Shishu, and the Tandabato Tungeshi Bato Yashumudusam. Das Samlokora Chibucha Shasam. She ngar Rachi Banchibashin to Tanda Shenche Banche. Ngar Shen Yavar do Ashindo Ran Shen Gita do Lutane. Shendin Bashi Truku to Samsa. Oh, Tende Samlutane. Takshe Cheve Samlo Ose. Oh, Tende Tonde, Sanjay Kova Toba Chaku Dosa. Simja Tamjek to Niba Yosu Toba Kona Trup to Sanjay Kova Toba Cha. Teche do any Tambechu Yen and Bekuno Satam the Sember Shows. Oh, did it.
So then to get liberation for just ourselves alone is really quite a base kind of an attitude, quite an unsuitable sort of an attitude. If we look at those who have shown us great kindness in this life, like our mother, our father, our partner, our children, our friends, and so forth, we can see that to just pursue our own aims but neglect, not even think about them, is really quite unsuitable. We should reflect upon the great kindness that these beings have shown us. And not just those like our mother and our father, but really because we live in society, we are dependent upon the kindness of others. All that we need, all that we eat, all that we wear, all of the shelter that we have, those kinds of conditions are created by others. They have this special kind of kindness in that we can't really just live by ourselves, but we are dependent upon the work of others. Like someone built our roads and our house and planted our fields and so forth. And so it's not just that we can like be on our own, but rather we are very much dependent upon the kindness of others. And when we look at the one who has maybe been the most kind to us in this life, our mother or our father, someone close to us, given that there are countless previous rebirths, we really can't point to anyone who has not acted in that capacity, who hasn't shown us that great kind of kindness. And recognizing that, we have this kind of thought, like you want to repay that kindness, that really, in order to do so, it would be best to become a Buddha, a fully enlightened Buddha, free of all faults, with all good qualities, to be able to benefit them, someone who could bring about their happiness and benefit in a true way. And that's one way of contemplating, but we could also look at the fact that we and all other sentient beings are absolutely equal in wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer. As Shantideva has said, in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, because it is suffering, it is something to be dispelled. It isn't just our suffering that should be gotten rid of, but anything that is suffering. And so too, when it is happiness, it is something to be accomplished. This is the way of things. We are not different from others in that way. But so rather than just doing for ourselves, which is really not right, we should recognize that this is something where we should be working for the benefit and happiness of all sentient beings, that we need to gain that state of Buddhahood in order to be able to benefit them. And it's not just that we are all equal, but really, if we contemplate, we can see the fault of our self-cherishing attitude. Up until now, we have cherished ourselves above others and really kind of neglected others. But when we look at where this has gotten us, it's not as though we have become the best or we have attained something wonderful for ourselves based upon that, but rather seeing the fault of our self-cherishing attitude, that it has led us to greater suffering. We can say that we need to exchange these kinds of attitudes. Rather than allowing us to be driven by our self-cherishing, we should be driven by a wish to benefit others, exchanging those kinds of attitudes such that we really see the value in cherishing others. And with that kind of contemplation, we then give rise to this thought, I am going to strive for the state of Buddhahood in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings in the most full way. And in order to do that, I'm now going to listen to the Dharma. So we should set our intention for listening in this way.
Oh yeah. 당한 저 참되대 봐. 가서 산계의 송배 돈을 가서래. 수 땡제 제벌을 좋아 통화한테 최통어. 수 최통화한테 산계 통어세. 땡제 제벌을 좋아 너 치셔 봐. 대다 장도래 내더래서. 수 땡제 제벌 좋아 통어 산계 통화를 봐. 최통 최박벌 남편한테 통화를 봐. 근데 대통화한테 산계 통화를 봐서 대송번에 개라는 저거를 봐서 되게지 좋아라. 근데 대송번에 개라는 저거 말해서 저는 산계 송배 도나랑 예도다 장도니 요래. 대나네 장도에 도래서 공부시도 장고에 도들 장도에서라. 시코라 카도를 송번에 개라 소바들 예도에 도서라. 어디 장도에서 장도에 도들이야. 공부적인 도시다. 댐고게 도시요래서 공부적인 도시들 가지고 납사라. 그래서 단 댐버 공부 도시에서 요구도 산계게 지야부하고 그러면서 지단 출로 있는고 그런 떠바데 소바데 상마 댐바에 바짱 소그래 아니 지단 출가가 정말에 찬양바데 소그 와라 단 산계 좀 된데 된데 매바 장도당에도 망보시 송에 가르셔와 산계 쿠라소랑에 장도당에도 망보시에 계속가가 딱지 지시 결로다금 캐남께서 된 고들을 연구도 와 어디인데 산계의 주제 감다 삼바다 발라냐 치다와 신도 킨데 내가 주제 강을 가르송나 팽게도 좀 가셔를 다 여봐서 가셔를 다 예배 켈레마서 가셔를 다 매봐서 벌 써봐 다 되더라와 장도당에도 마부 용해도 뒤래더라 내가 강을 패봐 가르송나 그 삼바다 감다 삼바가가 챙기데 아니 가셔를 뒤단데 내가 티시나 가도 삼성거라 더도 트사데도 고치 버와 야 어디실람
So then picking up here, in the text, in the English on page 111, we are talking about this section from the sutra that says, monks, he who sees dependent arising sees the Dharma, and he who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. And so here the question arises, is it okay to assert that we take that kind of literally, that we take it according to the words? But rather it is said that we should understand this as being something that is requiring interpretation. There are scriptures of the Buddha that have a particular intention, a kind of implied intention. And so we need to understand well that the scriptures of the Buddha can be divided into those that are provisional, meaning they need some kind of interpretation or they're leading to another understanding, and those that are definitive. So one might want to approach it thinking like, well, everything that the Buddha says is truth, and so we just take that literally. But rather, this is something where the Buddha has said it himself, that like you should examine well what I teach, the way you would examine gold. You need to investigate. And the Buddha has taught according to the various kinds of dispositions, intentions, latencies of various beings. So at some times he may teach that there is a self or that there is not a self. He teaches according to what is beneficial in that moment for that particular disciple. And so here we can't just, we had gone through the 4 kind of different types of scriptures of intention, and then we will get into those that have, we could say, hidden intentions or indirect purposes. This is translated in various ways. But one should understand that the Buddha's scriptures are not something that can just all be taken literally. We need to know when they should be interpreted.
Oh yeah. Oh, then she Rupta Mawa she Songudwa. She Tawatana Peveta Lam Tapshita, Jebu Tobjatuzo, Tara Mabundo de Bada Shidra Mawa, Semzaba Umawa Shenekawa Kawara. There to Je Kambukora, so loyal Chode, the Sabache, Tambutilla shoe, no, to Jagashi Teleson, Gashi Teleson, Jumbe is a low chan and Draketera. So Lola Kare Baba Yenaya. Lola Kare, Deva Yena, Tinashin Yamlisha Vivato. The Inangarazo Namji, Kanga Uma Tenjua, Tisha Yando Sharma, the Shangonesena, Tawato Shina, Chitama, Tawata country do. Roa, and a dot about the country to Samzabakar, so Lola Karaka in a till Yamlishan in Jagora. Tinashi tapped the shit of the Tisungora. Titon da Remato Kangolia, Tomochik son, Rabot of Chicks and interview about Tujelia. Zambuli Melia, Coombo, Ramdi Tasso Mabur, Kasha Haza in Du Chaboyore, lot of Chaboyon Gora, or Tendel Ten, Pudama City Songoa, Tindo Rangarazo Lochande, Baja to 30 Tower the country to Sosolo, Kare Sambato, Kare de Odo, Tinashi, Kono, Rembe, Poma de Karishe, the Tustus, to Hexeto, Songoara Mato, oh, Titi Nagashangura, Samal and Damage Sonete. To the Ribama Bosonete. Oh, teach so now.
So then we see, according to the various kinds of philosophical schools, like the Vaibhashikas and the Sutra school, the mind-only school, the autonomous, the Prasangikas, and so forth, that they present different kinds of understandings of the base, the path, the result. And these various kinds of teachings we see are based upon what will be beneficial to the various dispositions of those disciples. So it is like we kind of present these philosophical schools, and they actually go in kind of stages according to the various dispositions of beings. Now, often we sort of just present like, oh, this is the Madhyamaka Prasangika, and this is what everyone should believe. But in actuality, we should be going through all of these and really practicing according with what fits with our disposition. There are many different kinds of levels of understanding, and it's important to not just sort of gloss over those, but really come to, in stages, understand what does the Vaibhashika school present, what does the Sutra school present, and so forth, in order to really come to an understanding. So the Buddha has taught in this way that accords with the various needs of disciples. That is why we see such a variety of teachings.
Oh, yeah. That Demgong Doshi, Dembor Combe Doshi, the Dembor citizen Gogocha Sombra Sura, to the Trambucha Musum says, nature Karinati, Kadul Masumbache, those any Chokushin Subatilla, Demurcombe dosigora. Oh, did Demurcombe dotiliane, Carson doshi Ugua, oh, T. Carson, Doti Canal Ugua, Sugar Dembur Combata Sera, Sugar Dembur Comba Sire, Sugar Dembur Combasana, Tuja Nam Rim Yiko, Nambeta or Rim Yeshu Shadow, any nega bringa Koran Devanashi Soshaga, Penacasa Tayu Soshayora, Kumbugane Kasa Gashik Tuashid, Ta de Chiruba and Devanashi Ta, Tender your best, Taxi Rawansing, Ta your best, ya Tuashura, oh, tell it to your Kashil. Your Marason Shanako Cheddar Lord Viara. Your Reson Shanako Tata Pen, Tati, oh, Kizut Kota Magatin, so good to tie in some Tata Pe, Kulan to Guada. Tin is the Karsura. Kendetalia, Yeba Masu Meba Masu Sugar, Kaga Sugar. Yes, on a Madi Mason and Madigatilla, Lema Jebs Sugar. Oh, Taya Kashe, Tasura. Chiribe Tawala, Nambe Tawala, Sushwe, Todalia, Tayo Rebe, Secochotisuna, Tayo Marisona, Cocheta, Luna, or Tanamba to Yavusi, Time, some Haledu Yora. Chakurim Yishwe, Todala, Cochita, Nambe Tawalia, Shwegi, Neta, some Lucet, Yabashe. Tanda Kokatu, Tamis, Tension, Madigatilla, or Tayo Res, Kumbungane Kuru, Kokua, Bone Kasako. Kumbungabudi Kurna Shiri, Tina Kurge Kasa, the Nalo Yortas, and Nagachibe Kibu, Takwachibu Rawat, the Yore, so Shasa Yora. Oh, Tijilamna.
So we had gone through the 4 types of scriptures with sort of an intention implied, and so here then we get to the 4 I guess we could say 4 types of sutras with a circuitous intention. Here the word means sort of like not straight, kind of like crooked or bent, and so here this really means that this is interpreted depending on the context. So there are 4 types of these, and we could say they are with respect to entry into the teachings, then with respect to characteristics, with respect to antidotes, and with respect to interpretation. So here, with the first of these, it is referring to those kinds of teachings that are made for the sake of entering into the teachings. So the Buddha teaches in accordance with the dispositions of various disciples. And so to help them come to understanding, will teach at the right stage what is appropriate for them. So there are those who say are non-Buddhists and really hold strongly to the idea of a self, like say a permanent, autonomous, unitary kind of a self. And if you were to immediately teach them selflessness, there would be a danger of them falling into a kind of nihilistic extreme, that there's just nothing whatsoever. Or there are those for whom if you are to teach, well, yes, there is some kind of a self, it's actually going to reinforce their kind of idea that there is a permanent, autonomous, unitary self, for example. And so the Buddha knows how to reply in the way that will be of best benefit. There are certain times when it's actually best for the Buddha not to reply either way, because the person is going to fall into some kind of extreme. So if, for example, a person is really holding to the idea of a self and teaching them that there is no self would cause them to fall into a nihilistic extreme, then the Buddha teaches that there is kind of a self, that there is some sort of person that bears these aggregates or sort of takes them up and so forth, because that is what will be of benefit to them in that moment. So the Buddha teaches in accordance with the needs of beings, and this is why we see that there are teachings that have these kinds of, as we could say, circuitous intentions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Tinitinashi, Holotambukas, Chutamje, Suneta, Palamela soda, Chutamje Sender, Chutamje, Tembatruba Yore, Songiora, Tin Yendu Tebatozo, Tambu Chutamje, Tembario Marisona, Lollipopgi Omarwa. The Remge Tekba Koma Tawala Shue Shido, Nicolo Tambekapso, Samba Tembatruba Re, Najo Tembatruba Re, Chilo, Takaga, Tembatruba Re, similar laws, yours, or the rest of the Tezo, Shuba Tembarco Betal Dura, Shuba Tembarco Dollar Dura, your teacher long.
So here, these kinds of circuitous intentions with respect to the entry of the teachings, we could also include the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, wherein for those of like the Hinayana schools, the Buddha taught that all was truly established in terms of the kinds of things that he was teaching, as they're unable to sort of understand that lack of true establishment that comes within the higher schools. So an example of the kind of circuitous intended scriptures with regard to entering into the teachings, we can include the first turning of the wheel of Dharma on the Four Noble Truths.
Oh yeah, tene ta shubando. Tene chenyi dembor komba se de ra. Chenyi dembor komba se. Oh, te karson go resana. Tatile lupta so medra yo tu she mo she. Tante dele chenyi dembor komba sana. Shu tamje ge ra. Chenyi shikpa mamba she ko te gyokjo je song sha ba. Tene tanda nganzo. Oh, yu tenje dembor chwa thwa te chö thongo se chö thwa te sanje thongo so es do. Oh, dear, you also do a single and Deburcom do Yisha. Caressne, Su Tenji Deburjo at the Yabuton Sona, Tombani Tongres. Te Tombani Tonsona, Pagbelam Yala Gag, Tombani Tongres. Te Tonsona, Sanjag Tombani de Tongres, Tombani. You also do a single Yabanser, you also do a you do start Tombani Shibare. Oh, this on the you also do a single. Tembatube tomba nyamba la kone, ane te tona sobare se, te songora. Senye debor komba, stanta de kapte le she te tire, ya te julana.
So here, then, in terms of the second type of circuitous intention, in terms of characteristics, here, we are again talking about this phrase that he who sees dependent origination sees the Dharma, and he who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So here, if if you say by seeing dependent origination in the sense of phenomena lacking any kind of inherent existence, you see that emptiness, that kind of emptiness of characteristics, intrinsic characteristics, that is then applicable as well to the Dharma and the Buddha. So that's equally applicable to all of those. Now here, in the we will get into some of the later ones, but in terms of having an indirect intention regarding the kind of characteristics, this will come different for different schools.
Oh, tene nyembo debar komba soda, tatila mambo to ati sensi chikri ngai bachen digre. Manzo kosa. Nyembo debar komba se te, tanda pena sanje, hoa jita sirtu son, shakya tobiche, sanje shi chumbe se ora, tanda namre shiba sikdoa. Hoa jita sirtu che, son che ra. Te hoa jita sirtu de, sanje sirtu de, konglo sanje chumde de le maa shu doa, jiten kal pete sa. Ene kusu ku che tu tele che son doa. Te son do ya tu jan gashi te sam go, o sanje chumde de, te su le memba i batra sam, konglo shida shu me do. Kusu wa tende chabu me do sam, tende same mate ba kewe nyebu lo son go yara. Ene sanje chumde de ge, o tende ko sam le mate ba yone dik ma re kone. Nga te se te chona, ene ka su le, sirtuk, sanje sirtuk she cha kyu do son barwa. Itu kasha namde gyurdo se te karas nyambanye la kone songe wara karas ne sanje changma choni choba tarsheba nyambare shuguda shi shugu tarsheba kutoba nyambare te nyambala kone ne nga te te na sanje te te gyuro se songshaba tabude madeba ke nyambole a songshabi wara o te ju lamne jure senshi chi lamne devcha.
So here, then again, when it comes to these types of circuitous intentions, we have those that are related to the character. And here we won't get into all of the various details, but just try to get a basic idea of each of these. And the next is then in terms of the antidote. Now here, again, this is taught with a specific kind of an intention that these sort of here when it comes to our grasping or uh, and I think Geshe-la is actually going to something that is talking about the equality. So here, when it comes to the kind of like the various Buddhas of the past, we have the various Buddhas that have come in the past, and we might have some sort of idea that there is a kind of difference between the various qualities. Like we hear certain sorts of descriptions of the body of the Buddha or the signs of the Buddha or certain things. And here at the when it comes to Buddhas, they're all sort of equal in terms of their having accumulated the two collections and having attained the truth body and so forth. And so some things are taught with this kind of specific purpose of acting as an antidote to a particular kind of a misunderstanding. And here, there are teachings that are taught as an antidote, and then there is also from the other category those of equality. But I think when it comes to certain teachings are made with a particular sort of intention to act as an antidote.
Oh yeah, tati konde de lobe kamashila zebe shona leungudwa tisilo shana ndimeta. Oh kamashila zebe Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe de kasore shalu jambe de Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe o dina sombane su chige sombe teje debar jowa kondo chuba tede segdo su teje debar jowa tona chotongo su chotongo de sanje tongo se do de sungora teje debar jowa kondo chuba tene pagbe chu ngombar tokba te se tonda be chu kondo chu ote Palamela Gala Saba Kundu said that Tundambe, the Tombani, Chig Tombani Tona, Chig Tombani Toba, Capsia Tunda Resogora, Telecon and somebody say. Teji Debarjua Tonsona, Tombani Tongure, Tonsona, Palamela Gay Tongure, Tonsona, Sanje Tore said, Sanje Moneton, the Palamela Gay Moneton Marwa. Do you think it Tombani is? Chig Tongi Tona, Chotam. 동영을 숨도 또 개ገብ거라 어디 냠발 권에네 somebody 세기도 콘도시서 타지고세 셰다 양등이래 게다가나 법배시용 바로 또나야 양다베 시단 데베지 법배시용 바로 또서나 동반이로 양다베 시단 데베시 내줘바데 지게 숨베 때제 데버를 좋아 돈을 쳐다 사게 통어 좀 된데 그 송서 디에체를 냠바니라 공바다 용수 주베 생일라 공베 송소 데 도데 수테지 데버 조아 통나 최통어 수최통어 산제 통어 세된 도데 냠바니라 공베 도레세라 더담바 마투바데 치기지 통나 치기들 통아 냠발 공네 소바레시고라 근데 용수 주베 생일라 데버 고바 또 용수 주바시데 콜로탐 콜로 셈잠베 공바데데 군다 샤와 용도 세셔라 때 용도 동반이 된다다 된다 신다 신모 동반이 때 용수 주베 천일한 데버 컴베토레스 용수 주바데 치데 또나 치데 또발라 코네 아니 치데 셰나 치데 셰버레스 데버 코네 커버 소버레스 거라 좀 되게 깔라 개와메 바고 제선데 좀 되게 깔라 개와가 요 마레세 공부시에서 수신의 송반에 신데 마르데 텔레 코네네 sombarese jesigido to dibado chilona
So, here again, from Kamala Shila's detailed commentary on the Rice Seedling Sutra, and we're dealing really with this passage that says that he who sees the Dharma and then sees like the Dharma in terms of the Eightfold Noble Path and so forth, sees the Buddha. This really is referring to understanding the emptiness of each of those. So, whoever understands dependent arising that was spoken thus will know the teachings of noble beings. This has the meaning of understanding ultimate phenomena. So seeing the emptiness of the Dharma, the emptiness of the Eightfold Noble Path and so forth, that, as Aryadeva has said, seeing the emptiness of one thing, we can see the emptiness of all things. And so basically, in terms of this kind of statement, we can't take it like so literally, but rather need to understand it to be whoever sees the kind of character, that empty nature of the Dharma, then is able to understand that in relation to the Buddha and so forth. So it says, consequently, when you know the teachings of noble beings, you have genuine sublime wisdom. Therefore, when this yogi sees the dependent arising that was spoken thus, he or she sees the Dharma and the Buddha. So when you have that kind of understanding of their emptiness, their ultimate nature, then this is what is being referred to with seeing the Dharma and seeing the Buddha. The Blessed One has stated this. Therefore, the Buddha taught with the contextual intention of equality, as we saw in the first set of those, equality in terms of these are equally lacking in any kind of true existence. They're all equally empty. And the circuitous intention of perfectly established character. So here that phrase perfectly established, we shouldn't understand that as within the context of a mind-only understanding that distinguishes the kind of imputed dependent and or sort of imputed character, the dependent nature and the perfectly established character, but rather this should be understood as referring to their emptiness of any kind of intrinsic existence. And so this kind of scripture should be understood in terms of the intention of equality and that kind of circuitous intention of perfectly established character. The Blessed One intended that there be no contradiction with regard to his words.
Oh yeah. No ga ju de ra. Den de lu chu da lu do se de ra. Den de ya la chung ye ba. O de su ju wa da lu su me ju wa se. De ni she ra. Ku ne ye mo cho je den de lu chu lu do se. Nam ja na bar sa we den de lu chu lu do se che ra. O de she ra. Den de ya la chung ye che ra da. O de so lu cha be do le se. O ne ka de mari be ken je du chi duchi nam sheso jese kande mare be kenje duchi kenje nam she panje yogu wa tade ala chongi te tome mare be kenje niban duchi kenje soba nam she panje yora o tinde soba sura kande mare be kenje duchi nam sheso je kune nyomo be tede ene kune nyomo be tede lutungo so tenese kune nyomo be tede luta tubasna korake ki ribada tuba jine shebatele luda tuba sigura kiwe ribada tuba ji panchi shebatele ludo su de tele do de ya shebatele ludo sigura o de tome mari be kenji duchi shun duchi kenji nabar shebase etene panchi ma she de tende luchu shegura kune nyomu be tende luchu kande mari be kenji duchi nam sheso je kune nyomu be tende lukten dang luchu chikbara luda tuba shene kor urim da tuba shi shegura. Ngo su tene lukdo de tangi tembar esera. Lukdo de tangi tembar. Tadi ola ma yungure. Tela mariba gagbe duji ga shiso ki nambar shawe tende lukshu. Nambar shawe tende lukshu de mariba ga na duji gagre. Duji ga na sumba namshigani diga gagre shela chunyin gagbe rinba sungutwa. O di sungura. Tela mariba gagbe duchi ga shiso ki nambar shawe tende luchunga su tene lukdo di tenji tenpa re se ra. Tenji tenpa imbe te tsu kante resi ta wane shek ra. O tiba de chik lo shana.
So then we turn to the next section on the factors of dependent arising. And here we have the forward and reverse order of dependent arising. So when it comes to dependent origination, this is described both in the kind of forward order, how it proceeds, and then in the reverse order, both for the afflicted side, how it is that we cycle in samsara, and the thoroughly purified side, how it is that we get ourselves out of that. So here in the Rice Seedling Sutra, Maitreya describes the process of dependent arising in terms of the 12 factors, beginning with ignorance and culminating in birth and in aging and in death, which he expands to encompass sorrow, lamentation, misery, unhappiness, and conflict. So here, the rice seedling proceeds first by listing them in forward order. So beginning like dependent on ignorance, then there are conditioning factors and so forth. And this also can be done in the kind of reverse order, wherein you are looking at, well, consciousness comes in dependence upon conditioning factors, which in turn comes in dependence upon ignorance and so forth. So there are the forward order of description, the reverse order for both the afflicted side and the side of purification.
Oh yeah. That my power ne shevra. Then raw kamashila, lobe kamala shilage. Haba salu jaban do chachi debanal de son shas son lese. Kande son do sena. Kanda kwar jugba ta se. Kwar jugba shne kwa korta terwa. Tome maribe kunala niban do jitinde dreche de kwa kugyore san do are tu samgyora. Oh, kanda kwar jugba ta. Dogba se kwa do zan de dona de dona de dore sedra. Dogba la mongba nam se te hama ko ke tozola. Mongba te ta tewar chawe se kwa jugdu kade jore kwa dogba kade dogre se ti ha ko ye to da mongba ta trewe se do. Endo lojo da lo do ni so bare se ra. Lo so jowa da lo so me jowa na ba ni ji. Kune nyomo ba da na bar chawe chole samde te je de bare jowa ten dos. Kune nyomo choje lojo lo do ta namja choje te de lojo lo do ni ten bare se.
So here then the Rice Seedling Sutra, and we can see this as well from Kamala Shila's then commentary to the Rice Seedling Sutra. This begins by listing these 12 factors of dependent origination based upon how we engage in samsara. So based upon ignorance, how we then have conditioning factors, and then based upon conditioning factors, consciousness, and so forth. And then it describes as well the kind of reverse order, how it is that one reverses or averts samsara. How do we get to that point where we sort of stop all of those various links? And then it as well, so here in the description of these 12 links of dependent origination, we again have the kind of order in which one engages in samsara, and then how one reverses that in terms of the afflicted side, and then as well for the thoroughly purified side, how it is that these we sort of get ourselves out of samsara, and how that process works as well.
Oh yeah, that she kwa jugbe debuta, right? Juye chule tunge temba to kunju temba. Kwa jugbe jushe de kunju temba shegora. Kwa jugbe debushe de tunge temba shegora. Kwa jugbe debuta, juye chule tunge temba ta, ane kunju temba nishera. Kwa jugbe jude kunju temba rwa. Jugbe debude tunge temba rwa. Ta kwa la dogbe janje sora, debu tewe debu sen, debu ngone mara, tarba se sona. Ko debu ngone ngobu treyo mara. Tunge da tewe chawa, tunge da pangba, tunge gogbe gogten sene, pakpa shagura. Ta tele tende sora. Lam kumba le tene, pangja metin chote, tel doa sonza, tele debu se badu, debu ngone mare. Judan ken le tene keben debu mare. Ina lam kumba le tene top kuyora, teke tende sora. Ane kwa len dobe, tende gogten derwa. Ane kyude karasan lamden. Teta lea mongba sewe seto, kwa jugbe kyukare, debu kare, kwa dogbe kyukare, debu kare tupkare se, tende mongba de sene ba hakore seto songora. Chule, the Corsera, Tembata, Chule, Tembala Momba, Nam, Tembashila, Kevasha, or Teshide, Juan Judos, the Tunga Temba Kunju Tembani Ugodoa, Paul and Dogwas, the Golden, the Lamding Ugora, and Tembashidengodoa. Sene, Tembashila, Kevasha, Kune Yamoba, number 7, Lujuda, Luto, Yet somebody else. Tia Kune Yamobe. Kune nyamu bata nabar chawa nigara lojo da lodo nini yore ese. Te tari te kung de la paba thome ki tekwa shenpu tuba le tinte so shaase. Loda tumba ta, loda me tumba chita bo shena, kune nyamu be loda tumba ta, loda me tumba ta. Nabar chawa loda tumba ta, loda me tumba kya, teji debar chuwe loda tumba ta, loda me tumba Temba Indo Tata, Kune Nemo Shoji Tente Lujo Ludo, Namjan Shoji Tente Lujo Ludo Teate, oh, Tene Kune Nemo Shogi, Kudan Trebu Kwa Kandes Kogres, Kwa Do du Kante Dore, Teach and Dalia Sungres, oh, the Loshan. Yeah.
So here, sorry, I've neglected to read some of this. So when the Rice Seedling Sutra states that dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur, this explicitly indicates the forward order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising that follow ignorance, and implicitly indicates the reverse order. And then the statement with the ceasing of ignorance, conditioning factors cease, explicitly indicates the forward order of pure factors of dependent arising, and implicitly indicates their reverse order. And so then we might ask how these two systems work. And again, according to Kamala Shila's commentary, it says that in order to free from confusion those who are bewildered about entering and reversing cyclic existence, dependent arising is taught, covering the afflicted class of phenomena and the pure class of phenomena in both the forward and reverse orders. So here, this the kind of teaching of the forward and reverse orders is also linked with the Four Noble Truths and a proper understanding of that. So the forward and reverse orders of both classes of phenomena are indicated in order to clear away confusion and hone a skillful understanding of the Four Noble Truths, how it is that one enters cyclic existence, where true sufferings are the effect and true origins are the cause. So here, when we have those true origins as our cause, that is going to lead to the result of true suffering. And how when we are seeking the freedom from reversing cyclic existence, how it is that the freedom of reversing cyclic existence, where true cessations are the effects and true paths are the cause. Now here, when it comes to saying that liberation is a result, this isn't actually like a real result, in the sense that it doesn't come about from causes and conditions. That cessation, that absence, or that abandonment of suffering is the result of developing higher paths, but it's not the kind of result that comes about from our normal cause and result process, whereby it's not like a compounded phenomena and such. And so here, then when one has this kind of, this is taught in order to give that kind of skillful understanding about the process by which one engages in samsara, and then the process by which we extricate yourself from that. So this is what is being described there. This is the reason for describing that there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Tente Kunzu Lase, Tente Deborah Kunzu to the new Resera. Kunzu Bada Tenta Tente Kunzu, Nilese, New Yobale, Kunzu Betenge Deborah Joa, Lojoda, Lodo Kunzu Chidarishina. Kunzu Sena, Tente Yala Junior Lojoda, Lodo Kunzu Share. Tenta Basana Tomba Nete, Kunzu to the Sivara. Oh, that one. Chidayan Shena, Tanti Mashigua. Dine Tembashi, Kurimda Timber. Komgoba Yendeso, or Tente Lujun Ludun Koyam Comyate Tembashi Kurim da Timber Komgo Aresha, Komgo Resha. Taken by the Papa Tomic and number 10 of Toale Sunsha Ashera. Tedana, Secondation to Snake Tedana, Tension Debra Joa, Lusu Joa, and then Lusu Mijoa. 로션 좋아 당하시 근데 로션 미 좋아 로토도 쉬어라 로션 미 좋아 로션 좋아 많이 봐 취신도 동해다 군중을 딱 봐야 넣으세 동해대 군중 대지 대바리 좋아 로션 쉬어도 도매 말이 봐 이번도지 된데 쉬어야 돼 쉬어라 취신도 동해다 군중을 딱 봐. 동해대 봐도 군중 때 봐. 쉬어 또 달이야. ane kune nyomo be tente lotion do to shege res te wa don go be te bala ta ba shi go de de ta ba shi ne ene ka shi ni ne marik pa pa la lo so jo a mai bar do ko se ta de te wa don go de le ta ba shi go de le ne chu de ha ko ya shi do shi ne ka shi ne marik pe par lo so jo a mai bar do ko se teje chirshena tade 동해 제 tempa chungsim batese tanda nga zulwebe 동해 tempa chungsim batese chidari chene gagwa gyurushinase ta kun jungde sa thome mari bachingi bai banchin chungra tam baba sudu kande sograsena gagwa gyurushina mari bai kengi kawanda so mari bai kengi chungwe le sadu machenas mari bai kengi chungwe ra thome mari bai wange le sadu masana Maribe kenji chungwe le sadu machena gaba gyuru nyamdo tokbe chiru se. Maribe kenji shihwadu sone le sadu machena ane de shenta su gadu. Ta maribe meba soyate ta meba tokura. Ta meba tosana maribe gadu shenta gadu se. Tokbe chiru. Te tetar tempa sumbu nambar chene. Gobe tempa de tobar chungwe lamde kaista gogde de top goina te top je lamde karasana lamde kaya sangne kare se ro tobiye ge ne tapshi de karasana ene kare kaya shiko nyamdo chowar che so ore tende kare na sam lamde kande na sam chowar che rese lamde chugre se tambo goten che ne goten de top je lamde kande na sam chowar che lamde chugre se ora tene kare dine te jikdenbe yila sheba kone tenpa shila sheba yendo osa jikdenle tenpa tende mara jikdenbe lamje gansu kumdi tende lukshu da longtu da o tende samla tane kongure sungkuta ya tipo tisi lapshana.
So here again, with respect to meditating on dependent arising, there are these meditations on both, as it says from Asanga's Compendium of the Mahayana Sutras, how is there both a forward order and a reverse order? The forward and reverse orders of dependent arising are taught by way of the forward and reverse orders of afflicted phenomena and the forward and reverse orders of pure phenomena. So then turning with respect to how to meditate on dependent arising, there are meditations on both conventional dependent arising and ultimate dependent arising. How do you meditate on the forward order and reverse order of conventional dependent arising? So here we have conventional dependent arising in terms of the causality between the truth of origin and the truth of suffering and the truth of the path and the truth of cessation. And when it comes to ultimate dependent arising, that is referring to that nature of emptiness. So based upon this, it says you meditate according excuse me, to the order of the Four Noble Truths. And the Noble Asanga's Compendium of Determinations states, consequently, you analyze true sufferings and true origins of suffering in accordance with the reverse order of dependent arising and the forward order of dependent arising, respectively. So therefore, thereafter, you want to analyze true cessations and then use the reverse order from aging and death to ignorance. And what is the reason for this? Well, really, it's in order to understand this kind of cycle. If you ask, how would I have permanently ended these current true sufferings, those that have already arisen? And then you think these would have ceased when I no longer created new karma that arises from the condition of ignorance. So based upon kind of realizing that causality, you understand that in order to get rid of these suffering aggregates, one needs to eliminate the kinds of conditions of ignorance. And after you have thus analyzed these three noble truths, you start searching and think, what is the path to attain this true cessation? What is the measure of the path? So here, if you're going to assert that there's a cessation of suffering, what are the means by which one achieves such a cessation? And what is the kind of path that one needs to travel? So, this is then the way in which thinking about contemplating the Four Noble Truths is integrally connected with this kind of understanding that when we get rid of that fundamental ignorance, if you are able to eliminate that cause, then you are going to eliminate everything that comes after it. And so here, coming to that kind of understanding establishes the ability to then eliminate the kind of causes that lead to this cycle of suffering.
Oh yeah. Tanga zu de ma dina she de ta de she tama dina she do di abu nge ko do dina ma dina she de. Kare shine ngara zu ko la nge ba ju ala ten de ya la ju ko ne ko ku ju she go ya ra. So so ko ku du nge samlu na la tang bu nga samsa tin de samlu ta. Ne nga ye samsa samlu ta ro. Ani chak ba ke ta wa ke te te wa ke le sa ne ke we le sa ne nge so le ke we le sa ne Dentro le kigre sam tunge kanga niki vele sa wala tene nyam thome mari bada niban duju angirwa niban duju le de la niki wa sa sona ane nge son ta tinde ke wa sa sona flada mele kia koye tu vele re te thome mari be kune la ane chagda ge wa ge le sa ge yosa kana khondre wa ge le sa na te mege wa ma to yo marwa chagbe wa ge so so o nga ya bu chen ma to nga tunge nyangre samsa chane shenja wang chige wara ke le ke wa sa ya yorwa ke chane la da mele ke le de thome maribe kune lang ge ware chadang ge wane chakbe wang ke we le de sa ge wara ta tang ge wang de me ge le ma to sa ya mara chakbe wang ke wa da me ke wa ni ga sa ya yora o ti inde ke we le sa sunane la da mele ke ta de wa tham je yo ge wara me ge le sa sunane gen de ta 동해 탐지에 연구하라. 어디체 소소 삼루탄 텐데 양라 중에 거는 과학 구조 삼루탄 거라. 대주가 그 그때 중어라 디디리 산텐데 야보 삼루탄은 오늘 셈바 껴게 줘라. 대 통만 매반에 다다버도 주스코데 다다 마오바나 코르테나 페차심부레 삼무코라. 대 야보 코스는 심지에 샹달라 니지 꿈데 대 꿈고라 심지에 샹다 당봉아 셔달라 신주 다근디 신월에 자기와 수준 챤다 세나시 ene tewa nge konza kwa kowe ore samre samtang ora tene kwa len doba de tawa dan trese tarwa towe ta tsu kang samlo ko ora temba shi ko ne samlo tang da de tende ya la che ko an ju to samlo tang ti abu samlo tang na ene ra le kar so da ni ju da ra le ko ni ji ke ya da ra tu nge de tra de le ra le ni ji se ora ene sha le ni ji shi shi ne che ra le ya Pechana Yogudwa. Ranko and Natu Sabalaka, Mane Shenda Ko and Natu Samlutana, Tende Lokawa Gigressor, Soso like a Chigo Mara. What did Dike Shabura, Tandinama Log in the Then a Tomar Kuna Yomo Tende Lugdo de Kona Conjeta, Tambo Tende Lugdo de Congoresera. In the Kande Congoresine, Tangarazu Gangala. Gore, Tene Nagore, Shigore, and then it Porutelia, Tunga Dramedar Mambo Yora, the website the Meneba Medoba Todd Povasera, and it's such a Yelegi Pumbu Tungegi Shigre, Soku de Gra, and it Tana says Sorage Tunga Shigre, or Tiabudo Tia Medo some Susu Tunga Shigra. So Dushi gets the Samuel Tanda Manchade, Dushi Wang Tunga Yungudo, Tire Masuchi, Masu Chado, and Dance, Damatone, Suji Bumbu Choy, Dushi Dushi Bumbu Sembata, Kondo, Ngajela, so when you more Chama, 용구로 대왕게 동에 끼기도 와. 도나 봉봉하고 동에 와 송고도 와. 주뒤샤네 봉봉하가 거네 동에 시치고 와라. 어디인데 때때데 야나 중이 거네. 삼르탄데 다 개바다 나와다 메시들레 텐데 용야도가 아니 겨와 ngamal에 텐데 바와이나 코아케 세도 텐데 노아삼 다데 가르리 좀 시일 숨바치그라 백 갈카보르스 토마 메반텐데 단다 텐데 셰타티네 시테 고르삼 티지레 다데 간데 쇼레스 동에데 좋아 타마 들어와 티카르초 티테 다 겨울란데 쇼레스 겨울란데 가르제니 겨울란 버리스 다데 타마데네 레 주베시베 레더와 에네테 레 산테 컨디션 세바다 렘바고 하게 셋업 거스 에토스 야야야 삼르타네 동해 덴바데 콩도 치네 티 구디 디디 레샤 섬텔레 텐 조샤 삼코고야라 오 티셰고리아 티실람나 마다소
So here, sorry, I keep doing this. There's a little bit left of this quotation. By remembering the conditions in a former life, you clearly know and think over how you previously taught the personal instructions for eradicating faults, the correct worldly view. Then you think, I previously reached the path repeatedly traveled by the earlier stages. This is the investigation of the Four Noble Truths, just the contemplation of conventional dependent arising. So here, this is how you meditate on the reverse order of the afflictive factors of dependent arising. So you contemplate again and again the principal sufferings that are self-evident, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, unhappiness, conflict, and so forth. And then when you investigate where these sufferings of aging and death and so forth arise from, you reflect that they arise from the condition of taking birth into cyclic existence and assuming the contaminated aggregates. And so here it is then, in order that we are able to give rise to a sense of renunciation, of wanting to get out of samsara, we have to have a good understanding of how it is that we cycle in samsara, how it is that these 12 links function, beginning with this sense of like I, this fundamental ignorance, this sense of I and mine. And then due to our various afflictive emotions, we accumulate karma. If that is sort of positive, it can either be positive or negative karma, but that is driven by that kind of thought of an I will lead either to a lower rebirth, that if it is something negative and a kind of non-virtuous activity, or if we have kind of a out of attachment, we can act with virtue and thereby ensure a good rebirth. But these are still within samsara. When one accumulates karma that is driven by that fundamental ignorance, that grasping at an I, like out of attachment to our own happiness, we engage in virtuous activities, but it still leads to something that is within samsara. So, we can reflect on the fact that the kind of sufferings that we experience are really due to our having taken up these 5 aggregates, these contaminated aggregates. And it is, we can see, due to our grasping, that fundamental ignorance that then creates conditioning factors that then leave imprints on our consciousness and so forth, that one experiences these kinds of sufferings within samsara. Up until now, we have been in this kind of cycle and haven't seen this sort of situation for what it is. But once we come to this understanding, we can generate a kind of attitude of renunciation with respect to our own situation. And then we can extrapolate that to others, seeing as Chandrakirti describes, like first grasping at I and then at mine, these beings sort of cycle like a bucket in a well or something like that. So it is based upon the kind of contemplation of the Four Noble Truths and really coming to understand that in relation to our own situation, that we can give rise to this kind of sense of renunciation, of wanting to get out of this. And so when you then investigate the origin of this birth and cyclic existence, you reflect on how it arose from the condition of becoming, which is karma. So again, in this way, you contemplate the various steps of our taking birth in samsara. So when we have that kind of fundamental ignorance, and then we give rise to conditioning factors and so forth, and we can see how it is that like our aggregates in particular, I mean, we have that sense of an I, but then there is this factor of discrimination where we say this is this. We kind of label things and identify things. And really based upon that, we accumulate a great deal of karma. And due to that kind of karma, we then understand the kind of results that come from this. So when we investigate the origin of this birth and cyclic existence, you reflect on how it arose from the condition of becoming, which is karma. So we have those kind of karmic seeds that we have implanted, and then when they are fostered and nurtured by craving and grasping, it finally becomes becoming, which then is the seed for a new rebirth. And so we see, finally, you investigate the origin of the second factor of dependent arising, conditioning factors or compositional activity, and you see that it arises from due to ignorance. So from repeatedly meditating up and to this point, you understand the nature of true sufferings, cyclic existence, and then by producing aversion to it, you generate the desire to be free from it and become an expert regarding true sufferings. So here, really seeing that all of our sufferings have as their origin this fundamental ignorance, and then it's not just our own situation, but that of others. It allows us to then be able to generate compassion for others. So if we are to just sort of keep in the same pattern, we're going to remain in the same sort of situation of taking birth and experiencing suffering. But by thinking about it, by understanding, oh, it's due to my karma that is driven by ignorance, and if I could reverse that, I could then get out of this cycle. It is this way, thinking about the Four Noble Truths, that one can actually generate true renunciation and then compassion for others.
Oh yeah, 당에 말로 winda. 나 토마르 군에 녀모베 텐데 록도 kom고도 록도 록종시도자 토메 마르베 kengi 니번 도시 좀 숨바 남시 좀 두스파스 삼다데 록종이 봐. 다 록도 세데 담부 가시다 냥에다 대수강가 동해 용해 쳇들이 용해다. 대수강가 가릴된 종교래 삼삼당도 아니 교환에 교환인데 용대로 마오발에 용주리 대수강가 가르쳐 용거를 삼단데 근데 동해와 인버데 시부자 하고라 야우자 하고라 다들 가르된 종교래서 네 가서 주지바 교환을 종어래서 거와 교환랑부터 말이라 주지바 교환하와 제 교환랑부터 가르쳐서는데 와마들이 저 근데 세제 타마 니번도 지기래 사야데 가르쳐라 나의 냐베 telete chore stende je paase ma samrata telo lugto sigora o tade shegorta kela thoma kune nyomo betende lugto kumju nese kashita se roba thama ke shidwa da keba da nyange shin tunge mabu nyo yoro mesi chigren gaya ne menga do ba to ngu ko ya tende mabu yor to sem tru ko ya nyoba cha ko ya tende mabu yora o jesu kanga samta jura 냥에 다 미가 dom바다 미가 dom바스네 코 동해 전에는 뭐해 들으시고라 카네치 셰셰 카네치 라불라고 ngog여라 뜻이 dom바다 동해다 동해 담바다 녀에 요르도 네 예메다 와다 semba 메키와셔 소소소소 삼을단다 만드냐 semba 메키와셔라 동해 류기 동해 시월이 되게 나차다 지 최대 dim마드 텔레텐 요거라 Ede semji tonga de mangare te soso soshawara. Konzo nga keda trado dan dransim da chi di su chi di ma sosa soso for chuche mijiba soshagdo. O tezu siwara. Tewa da yime tewa se de semji tonga de siwara. O tonga se luki tonga de niga yongara. Yime tewa da chukwa. Ade sem chukdwa da ma jaya te tezu kangal kosho ujira. Chukwa la sokbe. ché ne kasa ché ngobar sewe tungé ji tso de ta sewe changara zungu sum nyong de ro nyong de tungé de tso sigura tungé tso de tso se ene tungé ji tso de nam se dinam yane yando samne tambo tunge rang shide sam gudwa te kyo thoma me bana se tanda se mao bana tinde yongere sam te chona de ne nyawa yeda tunde tunge tinde nyangore lama ile tinde yore lale kena tinde yore kawa kena ko leda nyamu go shawa je yede ko kibe jiwa mare sam tunge de mabu sam tawda te ngone kalere samsa semliya nginjung yongura tanda bodo koe ne le longje to so pa sem ka de de atati ya bodo re bedo asam chik tayar chi ne te hai che ko re da sam sa sam ko ge ra o de tunge de ya bo sam tang bre che re tunge che se we tunge je so ten ya na ya do sam ne se te tunge sam ne ne ye le sam ba ta de khar je ne yong go re sam sam ge ra ne ka shi so tunge de nam ka le chung ta ba na se ta je che ne Tatinga tu namju insha sha je dorwa ya dingone ta je de ta cheba bode chi shenda je ke suyo ina kora rangshin ge yongyo ina thoma mewan tinde yongko kharche re samge wara shenda ra je chi shige na jire cheba bode chi ni chi ke suyo ina a kharche yongone sam ta samlita ge wara ta khwa kewa de ma de re chera kewa de kharche chore ta che che ge wara zo de nam yang ne yang du sam de ka shi so je tu ngen de nam ga le chung ta ba na se chung se de se che yo ra nang bal de ke se bu ra ngo bu ka re na ko te wa tu nge ka re na ko kyu ji wa ra kyu me ne ta se yo na ne che ge yo ma ra rang xin ji tu yong ge na shan da che ge ta ba che ge so yong ge na ne nyang je de re ma do ke she yo ma ra 교지 여자 교대 세셔 땅에 네 교대 매버서는 레브 매버 차그라 때 무슨 죽대 그러가서 지단에 교대 세셔 요라 대화 톱고네 교대 세셔 아니 교대 쪽고요라 마도가 대화 거기가 야부 거기서 용금에도 삼태네 깔레카로를 마도 용해시 요마로 대하고 용고 요삼 대 용해 교가를 삼티 삼다 아니 교대 쪽대게나 교상하서는 레브데고 마제스네 깨우고라 매버고 어디인데 ti samlu tangu yora, ti ke shambura, kyudan kengi wanga chonde. Chunam tamze, gyule chon se, ti gyu ti shin shikwe song se wado, gyude mewa soya yora se, tani tile taya yora kari ne, yaga jine toya yora, duwa jine chaya yora, gyu yosa, gyude dole che na. O di che. Kashi so tungen dinu kale chon tabwa na, dida sakche je pumbu lang des, pumbu lang ya kora madira, Success ne nyamu be wang ke chue pumbu te lang se success wa sakwa sakwa se nyamu se wa nga samsang chakdang ke samlo ke ni te wang ke le sa ne go ra sa success ke le sa ne ni te ko ke go ra mo se dita success ke pumbu lang de ko ar ke ve ke je chwa da so de so ga ra na bi so so bo de ke chambu ro ya bu re je te ve jung ne re sam ge wa ra sobo koran lang da koran mandi sara sobo koran chadu sobo tele temba chegane tunge to kanga mayo rayo rete wara sobo tele temba sa kogo mangbo chi wara kogo to madu de ne sami nam do ke shenda chado che kanga yong wara o te samtang ge wara no tin de kal sara koe ke saje ye pumbu lang de koare ke ve ke chwa das tunge ke nande tushu de ngara chu ta namju 동해 소아 동해들의 투그라 현당 원에서 삼을 당에서도 소아 동해들의 대상 통고가 말해 개반 도지 동해 레당 영문의 샤마도 교는 풍불랑고 코란 마디사라 따데 시덴티 저기 와 말아 대란서도 때마다 로사케 와 말아 어디인데 거 가르쳐라 동해가 나네 원에 삼을 당에도 개반 도지 동해도 도시에서라 소소 라마 매버서 레사 레다 녀무 샤마도 교네 풍부실 랑시제 근데 그 야가시 용해ske 요 말아 그래 대체도 대선 그 갈래 좋아 딱 봐나세 대다 사제게 풍부랑데 호르게 깨지 좋아데 답도 수데 소불랑에 코란 데도 소부 코라제 남시디 지디고 말 남시를 파샤 간게 오네 그래서 그래서
Oh.
알아 어디래 어떤 데버들 남들에 가서
No, no.
얘는 데이터 사정이다. 되는 양대 양도 삼네 가시소지 동에 되는 간례서 딱 봐나 데이터 사정에 풍부한데 코알 계획에 좋아 당해서 어디버들 질러들 그래.
Mm.
뭐야?
So here then when it comes to okay, so meditating on the kind of origin of our suffering. So with the subsequent meditation on the forward order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising is as follows. So we think about it in this forward order of how conditioning factors arise due to ignorance and the grasping at a self that from the outset apprehends a self and that which belongs to a self. And then you contemplate the arising of consciousness due to the conditioning factors and so forth, and how these the latter factors of dependent arising arise from the former ones. And so finally, you repeatedly contemplate and meditate on how sufferings such as aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, and so forth arise because of birth. And so from this, you gain clear knowledge of cyclic existence, your successive rebirths in this cyclic existence due to karma and the afflictions, and become an expert regarding true origins, producing a desire to eliminate suffering and its causes. So then the meditation on the reverse order of pure dependent arising is as follows. After fully contemplating the way of suffering of cyclic existence, so we think about the kind of sufferings that we experience. Once we are born, we have these experiences of suffering like aging, death, sorrow, lamentation. So sorrow, like the kind of mental unhappiness. When we think about, we have physical suffering, but it's really the kind of mental suffering that is much stronger. And when we get to a point where our mental suffering is really strong, we might lament that. We sort of verbally express that. And so the kinds of sufferings that we are experiencing right now, having taken up this set of aggregates, we then experience all of these kinds of things: death, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, unhappiness, conflict, all of our mental and physical suffering and so forth, all that we're experiencing right now. We need to contemplate where that comes from. We have to think about this again and again and kind of understand the suffering nature of these contaminated aggregates, in the sense that it is actually because we have taken this birth under the control of that fundamental ignorance. They are within the nature of suffering. So we think about this kind of process again and again because of the fact that we need to understand how it comes about. Where does our suffering come from? Is it like some creator God? We need to really get in touch with our kind of feelings about this. Is it something that is totally causeless? If our suffering were causeless, then there would be no way to actually get rid of it. If there's not some kind of cause, then we can't eliminate that. And so here, we need to think about the kinds of causes that lead to our suffering situation. Whatever thing it is, the Buddha has taught that whatever it is, it arises from causes and conditions. There's nothing that arises causelessly. If it were the case that our suffering were causeless, then we really wouldn't have anything that we could do about it. But rather, by investigating the causes, understanding what it is that leads to this situation, then we can actually get that. But it's not just sort of by thinking, oh, I really want to be happy, I'm tired of suffering, like, can I please just be happy? It's not as though thinking about this or wishing it will make it come about, but rather if we create the proper causes, then it will naturally come about, whether we want that or not. And so because all comes from causes and conditions, we need to understand the process of causality, understand how it is that that fundamental ignorance leads to the whole rest of the succession of this process. And once we have seen what those causes are, we can then get rid of them. And so here, when we're contemplating suffering, again, as it says, then you contemplate and meditate repeatedly on the factors of dependent arising, thinking in succession that by ceasing birth in cyclic existence, you cease aging and death. And by ceasing the karma that is becoming, you end birth in cyclic existence, and so on, until finally thinking that by ceasing ignorance, you end conditioning factors. And so then you can see that from this, you are able to eliminate these sufferings of cyclic existence, aging, death, and so forth, and obtain a true cessation. Now here, this is necessary for us to first have a really true, good understanding of what suffering is. Our suffering is not just those experiences that we immediately label as being suffering, but really when we're talking about suffering and looking for the cause of that suffering, it's important that we understand we're talking about this pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, that so long as we have taken up the aggregates due to the control of our ignorance and the kind of conditioning factors, we are going to experience suffering. So it is that pervasive suffering of conditioned existence that we should feel renunciation toward, that we need to come to identify and feel renunciation for, and then investigate, seeing that we are able to eliminate the causes that lead to it and thereby attain a true cessation.
Oh yeah. Tante sons. Kewa de karele chong takbana. Sibe legi. Chongye chuda. Chuba sibe le sigra. Le niba tujen de sigra. Nima sa shabe le de pe. Niba tujen cheche. Niba ke chocho sebe le teletini chongre sigra. Chuba sibe le. Siba kuala kewa le chocho che. Le niba tujen teletini chongre sigra. Chuba sibe le ki kenji choda. Chuba sibe le de karele tini chongre sigra. Ane kubal lemba sigra. Seba shuk chambu. Yawa. Keba seba kubal lemba sigra. Lemba se. Kausuri. Chakba. Shencharu. Shuk chambu tele sigra. Shuk cheru ro tele lemba sigra. Debu de masuna ko. Deba yubashe. Deba depe. Leyage. Rayage. Leyage. Samlo korida. Tambu seba ti yabu du sam. Seba ti ungwara. Kubal lemba ti chuba seba. Chuba seba ungwara. Keba seba ti ro. Tini le de neba tujen so shawara. Neba so shabe le de ya. Kyola neba tujen so shawara. Chuba seba le. Keba seba sera. Keba seba de. Tome marwa niba de sumbane shiba namse. Maba kiji tukba rekba. Tukba sora. Seba de soa ge ungwara. Soe ke yuwasa. Yu dhamma se ton. Ani te yabu do. Te yabu medo sam. Tambu na ngara zu kumshi kora de. Yu le ta ju san soso koya ra si kari do tangere si ora. Migi chi taso na soso koya de ya ora si kari. Amzo ko na soso koya ra si roa. Echi mego de do na ko soso le yanyi ra si ne tubu do na mogo kondu se cho cho da. Yabu da dingal koya samsa. Kende soa do ga kumshi kora de. O ti indi ko Kome mare nipa de shimbana shimbana ngaba kije. Tukwa rewa tuba tsoa de rewa, tsoa de. Tsoa de kara sine yula rekpa de kara, yula ngaro chi temara sine tayan de kura, tiltawa, tilsa. Tukwa de tanyi tukwa mara yaara sta de yuda treba shinga tisira, tukwa rekpa sira. Shimbana ngaba kije, tukwa rekpa. Tukwa rekpa de ngaba kije ta mi shishara ji shegi wara. Tanda mitang tende ngeke tende shisha shishegi wara. Tukwa rekpa rwa. Shiba meso ngaba kije. Ene rekpa de karili tani chungara sene miki wangbo cha, nawe wangbo, ne wangbo, che wangbo chi tegu to sokbo liya. Titu nyoye tendo rwa. Ta drama da tonye ta koye ta tisu kanga haa konge wangbo te chungara. Shiba meso ngaba kije sene, miki kije, nawe kije, ne kije, kije. Tela tene ni drama da tonje, ene seba kanga kien gora. Shiba ngaba kije. Tukwa rekpa serwa. Shiba ngaba kije, tukwa rekpa. Tama, ya tiba to chila na, maata tutu chila.
So here, then again, when you have contemplated the kind of suffering situation when we are born, when we take up these aggregates, we then experience these various types of suffering. So where is it that this birth comes from? Looking at this process, we see that birth is dependent upon the karma that leads to that, the karma that is right before a new life that is called becoming. And so too, becoming that kind of karma that leads to that ripens in another rebirth is propelled forward by our kind of grasping. This sort of grasping, the ninth link, is in turn propelled by the kind of craving. So going in this kind of reverse order, we see that our taking birth is due to that kind of becoming, and in particular a kind of karma that has the ability to bring forth, to produce a new rebirth. And when we trace back, well, how did that come to be? We trace that back then to our grasping and our craving, and before that, the kind of feelings that we had that are based upon making contact. So here, the kind of, when we have various feelings about things like, oh, this is something good, this is something that I want, we have a kind of grasping and attachment toward that. And then based upon our feelings of aversion or dislike, we have this kind of like hostility toward other objects. So it is in this process of these 12 links of dependent origination are really taught from the perspective of a womb-born being. So it is independence upon there being contact, which comes prior to feeling, based upon having the 6 sense bases, which in turn have been developed on through name and form, through the establishment of name and form that came from consciousness and karmic formations and ignorance all the way back. So here, when we look at the kind of situation that we are in, this suffering situation that comes about through birth, we reflect, where does that birth come from? Where in turn does that becoming come from? And so forth, tracing back this kind of process of the sort of reverse order of the afflicted side of phenomena.
오야 당가바 제제데 시바 민소스라
Mm.
바 민소스데 코 미와 나와 시와도 차 조조예베시요다 민기 풍부스데 자 소보 차야 교들라 소제 샨다데 샤데 민기 풍부스다 소아도 시샤바르 바 샨다도 민기 풍부스다 시바 민소체 시바 민소데 숨바남셰리라 숨바남셰리 좋아샤 숨바남셰데 니바 두시게 레 숨바남셰스도 레게 니바 강가 냥게 들으시고라 지치도 양겨랑마 타베 들레서 저버려 겨 레게 니바 냥게 들레 규규규 남셰 제두기 남셰 신이고도 오데 레지 니바 레사네 티 니바 강가 냐제 되그라고 기네 셈다 냠도 데제 되그라 오데레 니바 디체 되니 니바 두시래 니바 두시게 레데 가르 연구에서는 다들 주바 시벨레 시와라티 당보 상게된 니바 두시게 레데라 디체만 니바 투제도 제네니 겨랑게 와라 니바 두시게 레데라 니바 두시게 레데 가르 연구 때 도메 말어봐 아 삼가에 삼에 가르 치고고 티고고 티고고메서 들리테네니 연구하라 도메 말어봐 연구에서 딘데 삼을 당했더라 룩도시도 군내 경무배 텐데 룩도 삼바스 당원에 투사대가 가에 삼 아니 차다게 텔 투샤 삼티하고 그러라 디바도 삼을 당고도 야 어때지라
So, in turn, looking at this kind of reverse order, the sort of sense bases arise independence, and that's the 5th link, independence upon the 4th link, which is name and form. So we have form, and then name refers to all of that which is not form that comprises the person. And in turn, this arises from the link of consciousness, which in turn is sort of arises or comes from the link link of conditioning factors, which are created by the first link of ignorance. Now, here, when it comes to consciousness, that third link, there are two instances of this. There is consciousness at the time of the cause, when that karma is being created, and then consciousness at the time of the result, when that is ripening. And so here, when we look at how it is that this process happens, again, going back to that kind of karma of becoming, the conditioning factors that we have accumulated in the past, when that kind of karma gains potency to bring about another rebirth, that is referred to as becoming. And that is conditioned by the kind of craving and grasping to become something that can propel us into another rebirth. But looking at the process by which this is created, we trace back through consciousness to conditioning factors, finally to that fundamental ignorance. When we have this sense of I and mine, and there's something that we need, we want, we have to have these things, we then engage in various actions, conditioning factors, which in turn create imprints on the consciousness and lead to the whole rest of the cycle. So it is in this way that you, by meditating on the reverse order, understand how one can come to end the kind of process of cyclic existence.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Maribe Kenji, Duchi, Lay Chunga Par, Yaya, Combesido. To Samlatangura, Nazo comes to Shinere, which comes, Shiji Samlatangua. When I send it to Congora, comes to Samlatangera. Oh, Tinde Tunga, Tinde to Kadichore, a Titi Telechore, the Samyate Samlata, the Samlatan Assembly Juadugara. Rather than Samata, the Nichikanachi Lapshamata Assembly Juadaki Omara. Sayane Yando, Com Jabsiti, Samlata, Chagum Tilisiora. Oh, Tinde Koyo, Titi Rito, Tindeno Gudo, Tindeno Gudo, Samya Samda, the Combiagore, Chagum Sigora. Ning never knew to any similar one in your driver. Tas chi imbere sami to stay at the San Madonna. Jogum de Tas chi Shinekume in any Chichanja Samda, the temperature. Mansha, the Shunchamun Shebet, and the Mansha, the Chagum Chewera. Jogum Chen, you have your mother, Chagum Mansha, Tambo. Yabuja Sosolia, Simlia, Nishi Yegura. Ain't in any Jogum Chen, the Chegora. Oh, Tindivichera. Oh, the Daria Combalese. Koa Dungaji Ranshindo Kondo Chune, Ta Kora Singet in the Reto Asam, Tatunga Ranshichimato Mindo Asam, Tandangazu Mili Kawal Sambarwa, Nenya Yada Tandul Kawal in the Yibaro, Tesam Tara. Kondo Chune, Tela, Lose Tenes, Tandabadongazu Sebayora, Koa Sachamato. Kira tarba tom the tanda dugu senga dugu me nalete tanda neshi tego sigra bada. Marshal te tanda neshi to stegi se surish doa. Une seni kibdara shit mata. Kasugu bedoa cha. The tinde samlutana ni shine sugira. Ni soso le ninju ninji kigra. Ninji de soso tambo kongura. Marajo ninji de nga tikale nagido chagido san chunju liya. Nga te de trainer sam giora. Ninji chunju ra. Tangde rangla tsawa te kyan kyudu nyingi charme besigdwa. Ngarazu soso tsawa chik yore de tanda kadu kange de nga di me shoka tete tre shoka samge yore chara. Chine chere sigla sokwa chanju seba tazo nga zul tatu sa tile lakwe nyingi chigwara. Tangde rangla tsawa te kyan kyudu nyingi charme bes. Tunge tsawa ne tre samlo tende yala chungo ne kowa koda samlo ta Tunge le tendo trewa samlo kogwara kya chenpu samlo tangdwa. Marajo tanda chen de la kale so tete mena ni digdu samsara siwara. Tsawa chunju de dwara. Angone na beche samlo tande yala tha rungbu shewe samlo tangura. Semje thamje chi. Maala tha rungbu shewe samlo tangura. Tu rungbu yu rungbu samlo tangura. Ane che kom thukure sangye koban thukure samlo ko thukura. Tende chibu mada thundu shi mena kaga kawa thukure samlo kogura. Oh, Tiboda Chilamna. Janete de Dore. Trende Geshe Tunge Temple Caber Juros. Tunge Temple said the Caber, Tunge Temple Caber, Ta Koa Kotande. Koala George Snake, Ninju said the Yungara. Tadabado Kate, the Sebapa Chate, the Tapetu, Shimbalan to Ataya Medosam. lar the dog soji yorwa nebar jo asida ninjung se tanda bodo kola shenji chaba de tabe shenja mebe kone tachiba kone suyo ate ninjung kirwara tatine trago to mebe chaba to sam kati gonna goro sam tanda namsa sotu eke homara oti mao bade sam tangwira oti bodo chilo.
Mm. So, here, when it comes to our contemplating this kind of cycle of taking rebirth within samsara, this is the kind of meditation that we really need to engage in. We shouldn't think that meditation is just like cultivating calm abiding, trying to remain silent and like not think about anything. But really, when it comes to our being able to realize the various topics of the great texts, the majority of these meditations are analytical, as in we actually need to think about them and contemplate them for ourselves. It's not just as though we can sort of stop thinking altogether, sit silently, and gain realizations of these things. But here we really need to contemplate the kind of suffering nature in order to generate a real sense of renunciation. Like if we're only thinking about those kinds of suffering experiences, the kind of temporary suffering experiences, we might be in a place where it's like, oh, well, I'm not suffering right now. It's pretty good. I think I'm just going to stay right here, like in my room. I don't need to do anything else. Like I don't need to go anywhere else. This is pretty good. But if we actually think about the kind of process by which we are taking birth in samsara, and we understand the kind of true suffering, the nature of this, then we will be able to give rise to a real sense of renunciation. And not only that, but also compassion for other sentient beings. If we're just sort of thinking about the temporary, small kind of sufferings like of ourselves, like, oh, I wish I weren't so hot, or I weren't so cold, or those kinds of temporary things, or if we're thinking about that in relation to others, like we might think we're generating some kind of compassion by thinking, oh, I wish those beings didn't have that kind of suffering. But really, that's such a small kind of compassion. The sort of compassion that these great beings, like, for example, Avalokiteshvara, have generated is the kind of compassion that wishes for sentient beings' sufferings to be eliminated completely from their roots, which is almost something that's like too big to even fit in our mind. We can't even sort of imagine that. And so here, we need to think in a way that is really sort of long-term thinking. It's not just about our very temporary, incidental kinds of sufferings, but this long-term, this cycle of rebirth. And in order to be able to completely eliminate all sufferings, we need to have that kind of view that it's not just this lifetime, but many lifetimes. And we need to think very vast, like not just in terms of a small scope of things, but in terms of a very large scope and a very long period of time. This is the kind of mental attitude that we need to cultivate, the sort of fortitude to be able to say, I'm going to strive for this no matter how long it might take, and I'm going to strive for this very vast kind of goal. And so here, this is the kind of the way in which, by becoming expert in true sufferings, we will feel real, genuine renunciation. And based upon that sense of genuine renunciation, we generate compassion toward others who we see as being in that situation. And then with a kind of resolve, we have this sense of no matter how long it may take, I'm going to strive for this. But again, this doesn't come just from thinking about it once or sort of hearing the words, but rather due to our meditating on it in the sense of engaging in analytical kind of meditation.
Oh yeah. Nanga zo tente kune nyomo be tente lucho kum ju de shege wata lule shonga kum ju de shege wata. Oh. Te che so se kune nyomo be tente lucho kum ju ne so da ta lule shonga na shi kora kurim na shi je. Tomar da grin zimbe nga samsa ngai samsa do ta sene nga samsa. Dagir su ngai samsa ngai me ngai na ngai lu ser tinte samsa ora. Oh, tomar tada dagir zimbe tangzi marik be kenji duchi ji le shos. Ta tomar marik be tangzi sura. O ta te yabu che ngai kora. 말아주 가시 나 삼사 삼로 코란 매버서네 디그리 송게 요래 나 삼사 나도 세네 니에요 말아 제자 공원에 매래 다 매래 삼 나메도 삼야nga 삼삼로 코데 다다가시 투나르 비체체 나기도 삼사 텐데 꼼주셔요라 가상 문제시 로가 먹어셔 다 지송가 봐도 저네 가상 문제 니 봐도 거라 나데 예배 장샤야 나 요래서 Chita Nambalia, Ta Mebar Mao Sigua, Nirat Mawati Sigura. Tikarisugurisne, Chiribaka Tas, the Tapa Chipu, Rawa, Chame, Ra, Umbulete Shamba, Sobo Sem so Tazulepe Loga, Nangishibe Kibushit, Tideshiva Samgiora. Sanje Chumde de Goti, Yoma Resungora. Timere Suzane, Sanje, Ta Mebar Mawas, Nambala Ta Mebar Was. 다 매번 마시고라. 그래서 다 매번 마시자 다요 말이스 남배 다 캐링 말이스. 다 캐말은 아니 소고 캐링 말아. 풍부. 여할래 바보 매나니 할랑자 용 말아. 너 롱셔셔 수대 들으려 잘라 소바 용 말아. 네 시자 가야 매게 차그라. 강가 매나. 어쩌니 텐데야나 종이도 과거수 닝지시다 가르쳐 닝지께고 뭐도 개통에 용게 요 말아 봐. 상규라 제자치다. 오 디가소래. 자와는 매가 마셔. 내가 서대. 라와데 삼을 거기도 왔다. 타라 마부 삼을 다요라. 소소 로를 가래. 겁나티 삼을 다는 되거라. 아 서대. 풍부 소나 마도 풍부 코라 마인게 풍부 소네네. 티 시시티 트시레 쩐두레서 소소레 소소 소불 때네 나들이 때문도 안 때문에도 삼자 삼을 거기도 Kadul ba nga dire se chili zu zu sa ke mi do nga membership le tene ne nga sam sa sam go do kinda ko rangya tu be nga me ba se ra rangya tu be nga me kumbule ten sha do rangya tu be nga ko ra so bo tu pa sha ne tele lo so nga yo na ti me ba kom tu ne sra pe ga rangya tu be se ta me ba sa ra ya ta ta do umma ba ne shi che ne rangwe ne tu be ta me ba se ra rawa tu be ta me rawa tu be ta me 어디 공로를 걸어 슝지 걸어 어디 내가 마블라빈 삼죠 예 가서 로빈 파벌에 되게 라와메 바데 때나 다네 요마에 소고도 되게 라와메 바데나 다네메 쇼탐제 다메서 다데 가사 다데 이거 말해 당이 생겨래 라고 당이 라고 뭐셔대 되게 라와메 쇼데 사마 라와메 당이 두요 말해서 라와메 라고 뭐요 말해서 되게 라와메 바데 때나 다네 요 말해서 라 텔레 로빈 다와타 뭐 저거 께데 텔레 다시 차와네 가시모부 남제샬라 라마레 병오랑 신테스 테메바네 타메보스 때 추다 가사기 예베 니스 가사 다메데 추기 다메스 니시도 니 요সম도 다텔레 제토가 봐 샬라 라마레서데 규진 샬라 라마레 발레 추알레 세그마레소라 틸레라브레도라 나 가레스네 샤데 탄yen 도버 로레 샤세고라 디디레 디카와레 디캉바레 디메레 디든두레 디키레 디타레 탄yen 따고도 탄yen 도버 로왕게 샤바 마이바 유코란 짱짱원에 수투베시요나 에네 랑원에 투베셔라 랑원에 나랑게 요 삼산데 탄다 마라드네 삼고도 소보다 셈다 저좀 밀라트네 가요 삼로 책메도 나랑게 요 삼고도 소보 게 냠도 로봇 되고 메도 나 삼사서 라와 지요 삼겨라 나 라와 지요 말에 라와 당에 요왕기 파샤 덕시 코라 마인게 가셔서 공부가라 텔레 때는 어디 가사시 그랬다 하세 화다셔라 다 가사래서래 당에 요왕게 샤과 쌈게 가사샤고를 마도 말을 대삼게 되고 말에 라문에 찍고래서 삼르쇼라 티요 말에 티요는 따제는 이게 그래 다 거기 마세 소보테레베 셈데레베 슬락바테레베 진짜는 내가 치고라 어디 지람나야
Mm. So here, sorry, I think I've like mixed up and read a little bit ahead. But so here we've been talking about meditating on the reverse order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising. And then we turn to the subsequent meditation on the forward order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising, beginning with contemplating how conditioning factors arise due to ignorance, the grasping at a self that from the outset apprehends a self and that which belongs to a self. So we have this idea of I, and then the things that are mine, like my eyes, my ears, my body, and so forth. So it is due to this kind of first fundamental ignorance that the entire process gets started. And so here, Buddhists are referred to as proponents of selflessness, and there's a lot of room for misunderstanding of that. Some might come along and say, oh, well, the Buddhists are proposing that there is no self whatsoever, really, when we talk about there not being some kind of objectively or inherently existent self, that means that there's no self whatsoever. So I don't really have to take accountability for actions. There are no connections there and so forth. And so here, there are those that would say like the appearance of a self is a merely mistaken kind of appearance. So there is no self whatsoever. And really this, from the Madhyamaka Prasangika view, is a fault of not having properly identified the object of negation. Because although Buddhists, yes, are proponents of selflessness, they're not like total nihilists. And so here, when it comes to identifying what is being negated, Je-la Tsongkhapa has really made this very clear, that we need to understand properly what is being negated with that. So here, if we don't some might think that, well, if you don't accept a self at all, then who is it that appropriates these aggregates? Who is it that takes up these aggregates? And if there's no self at all, then how do we feel compassion for other sentient beings and so forth? And so we need to understand here that there are different kind of levels of subtlety to the understanding of selflessness. And so first, there is a kind of a recognition that like when we have the basis of designation, there are some aggregates, and we think like, oh, I see Tashi over there. Oh, I see Tundrup over there, based upon seeing their form. Or based on our own aggregates, we say, oh, I feel sick, or I feel this, or I feel that. And so we need to recognize first that there is no sort of self-sufficient, substantially existent self. It can feel like there is some kind of a controller of these aggregates, as if there's something that's substantially sort of existent, set up by itself, that's somehow in control of these aggregates. And realizing the lack of that kind of a self is it can be very beneficial to us. Although this is not the most kind of subtle level of understanding, even that level of understanding it can be quite useful for us. But when it comes to the kind of highest level of what does it mean for there to not be some kind of a self, here, as I've quoted many times from Aryadeva, he explains that when we talk about self, and here this is not just for persons, but for all phenomena, there's no sort of objectively existent self, meaning that there's no autonomous kind of a nature to any phenomena, this thing that exists in and of itself. And so Chandrakirti, in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, has explained as well the lack of some kind of autonomously, objectively existent self is what we are referring to by being selfless. And so Chandrakirti, in explicating that verse, has made it quite clear that we're talking about the lack of some kind of an objective, autonomous existence possessed by either the person or other phenomena. And now when Je-la Tsongkhapa comes and then gives commentary to this, he explains that to say that something is not autonomous or not independent, this isn't in the sense of just not being dependent upon causes and conditions, as though something that we're not dependent upon causes and conditions alone it is what is being described here, but rather it's talking about this kind of existence from the side of the object, independent of our designating mind. We see various objects and on those bases then designate, oh, that's a car, that's a house, that's my friend, and so forth. And so if there was something that existed independent of, autonomous of such our mental labeling, that mental designation, then this would be what it would mean to have that kind of autonomous, independent sort of a self. And we have this kind of sense of that. We have this feeling of like, well, I'm right here. As if we should be able to point to something within us and say within these 5 aggregates and say this is the I. But when we investigate, the self is something that is just merely designated on that collection of the 5 aggregates, and that is what suffices for its existence. If we're not satisfied with that and want to put something more onto that, we're kind of beginning to reify that kind of existence. And there are those that would say that, well, such merely designated or nominal existence doesn't suffice for existence. There must be something beyond that. But here, when it comes to, as this sentence says, apprehending of a self and that which belongs to a self, Je-la Tsongkhapa and our previous masters have made very clear that it's so important to identify correctly that object of negating. What is being object of negation? What is being negated? And when we say that Buddhists are proponents of selflessness, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's the Pumbu, Rabu Kaya Roya, Pumbunga Letene, Das Patagua, Ming Karene Chala, she left in the garage, Ming Patagora. Ming Pata Chatunia, Koran, when to Rubachi Yomara, Mingi Wangi Pashara, and Jushara, did Tashi in that, did into the Kangba in that, did she in that, Tanya Yawangi Pasha. And the Pashara, when the Yukoran when the Sutrugune Lagumara and Tambune Lolia, Tashi, Tundri, Sutrugura, Yomara. Tanya Jawangi Pa, Pumbula, Nabukaru, Pumbula Tenpa, Tas Tagiora. Tita Zang, Tile Loss Meta, this software legacies on the target legacy of Shawdo. Tandu, Naganga, Nagadu, Nachi, Gondagadu, Sembaki, Medu, Chichi, Ribasebo, Medu Servo. Lagudua, this is Chawachi, the little Chawachi of Shawdoa. This is Chimanti to Ta Nagadu say Shawdoa. Takora Loga in any code Nagura, code Sagura, teacher Medua. Till the loss of Mebeton Dara. Umbu Lavachi to the Taka Chawachi of Shawdoa. Or Tidico, Umbula Turchin, Drelne, Tas, Tanya Tower. This on the Kodu Legacy, but the target Chawachi and draw at the Tevada, Tindi Shawdoa. There's a member of the Taj Loga in any Koran Chawa Legacy, but the Chawachi shower, but Sogu Legacy, Shakwe Kiomara. Lagwa Masune, Lagwa Masure, call Sana, Lagwa Sarmadonga Samara. Till a loss maybe thought it to her. Oh, Tin Ducasoda. Tanya Yawangi Shawas, Tokbe Wangi Shawas or the Tokbe Kari tended a cigar, Tambo Mingta said the quarry in the Tira. In a Tambo Tabal, a true star in a true labyrinth, true dose, true shigmara. But on the true said the Shandas Tashara, so Jam Yaga Gishita. This on the talk about the season, true Maris Chisidra. Truly shame over the Tabal Shago at Chagra. Truly talk about star, you know. Tambo Mingta get a sender. And on to talk about the share with me, truly share with talk about the truly Mingta, you know. So, Tanya, you want to shower. You Koran can win it to your mother, or this something. Yeah, I did not rupture any days.
So here it is independence upon the five aggregates or any one of the five aggregates that we merely designate a person. So it is only through the force of name or through the force of designation, our thoughts designating on that basis. Like we see one or any of the aggregates and we say, oh, that's so-and-so, or oh, I'm going, I'm sitting, I'm this, I'm that. If it were the case that there was something beyond that, that there was some kind of a self that were like separate from the aggregates, then there would be all kinds of faults that would occur. Like if our form is going along, we wouldn't be able to say I'm going because that I is somehow separate from that. Or if we say like I'm unhappy, I'm struggling right now, all of these things, I'm hungry. Well, all of those are things related to the aggregates. If the I were somehow separate apart from that, then it wouldn't be logical to be able to say that the self does those things. Because if it's somehow separate from those things, like if we see our aggregates are going somewhere, to say, oh, I'm going, wouldn't be logical because those aggregates and the self are considered to be two separate things. Or like if when we do various activities, like, oh, I got a wound on my hand, like I hurt, my hand hurts. Well, that I and the aggregates are separate. How could we say those sorts of things? So here the self or any sort of phenomena is merely designated by convention, by the force of thought and convention, but doesn't have any kind of objective existence from its own side, independent of that labeling process. For example, when we initially designate, we see a coiled up like striped rope and we say, oh, it's a snake. Well, it's not actually a snake because it can't function. I mean, a snake is something that has teeth and can bite us and so forth. But it is based upon our initial seeing that we say, oh, that's a snake. And then we find that, oh, it's actually just a striped rope. It isn't established as it appears to us. And so when it comes to like knowing the varieties of phenomena in the world, they aren't existent from their own side, objectively existent, but rather it is only due to our mentally labeling them that we can speak of their existence, or that has to suffice for their existence.
Oh yeah, that was yeah, tanga to did it. Kuna nyama betende lucho did it, lucho. Oh, that tetabu kuna nyama betende lucho. Kumju chidare shina se. Tomar tada dagir jimbe. Tanzi mari bekenji duji jile shonse. Ngai samsa. Rawa, any chick. Ngai nawasi titula launcher gauge sometimes. Ani ngay long che cha su cha te ro re cha la so ba ta kari na te su ta gi long che cha sam la ko da ta te su le ba che da pe ba tu ya ta tin de ba ma tu ba da men de ba che che na ani kon du sa yo gu da ni ka ga shi chu sa ra ani ta cho se ta ga cho da chen jo ka ne ti shen jo ka je ti ne ti te nyo mo ka ga che ni le sa yo ra tong me ma ri be ke ni ba du chi ge le chung che ra ta ti ba ji cha ju ra 대신도 누치게 깨게 남버셔봐. 수반남시 중으로. 수반남시 깨게 시바매수 영화바 깨시. 네 두바래고 템버서 깨바세바 꾸발렘바 주바시바 주지바 깨와. 네 중이바까 시치르고 되는시. 야 중다 졸로 데르르네 삼르다라. 디 대신도 누치게 깨게 남버셔봐서 텐데 ngamangam에 치마치마 중주삼데 타르 깨베 깨게 가시세 와 타르 거래 깨베 깨게 가시 다냥에다 메가도 고아 깨와랑바데네 가시데 메가도 뭐 중그리 타마테로와 어떤데 컴퓨터로 루중스고라 깨베 깨게 가시다 메가도 바다 다다게 동에도 강가데 텔레텐데 연구도 삼 와 메가도 바다 더버서기 동에 중주남 야야 samshe kombaro ya yane da samrtane kombyara leda nyomombe rido leda nyomomba le rani koare koa dere kewa chine chigdo kyode korwa la nyoa kene ta ra koa kijuti Tende shende kikutua samche, ta nyua kibere, so ha kore, ning tagbane, karsore, nishi nibara. Shen yimba mendo, yimba ro, sigi shere, shende, samle ke pingmare, so samle tane, one tire to, samna, nishi kene sen pengira. Kene kunju tembala, kevere jurshes. Lucho de samle tane, kunju tembala keva jure. De yosa de shigdan, de kenki de shigdan, de kenki de shigdan se. Ledan yamu yete so sheshe, tele tene, shanda, tunga tembate yogutu samse. Kunju tembala keva jure shere. Kuna yamu be tente lucho samne, kunju temba. Luto de sabde tunga tembala keva jure se. Kuna yamu bala, koala, kunju tembala keva jure, tunga judan sheba, pondo kewa yenosa, ta tunga de la hako, tele trende ke, ta de jude sensuta, o jude teresha, ta de mebasone, te mebachaya, yeba tacho shasam, nishin yedura, o te bada chila.
So here, again, we began with a sort of reverse order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising, and turning then to thinking about the forward order of the afflicted factors of dependent arising. We think again about how conditioning factors arise due to ignorance, the grasping at a self that from the outset apprehends a self and that which belongs to a self. So here we think of this I, and we have this desire like to get the things that we want, all the kinds of things for us and our side, and the things that feel like a threat or some kind of aversion, we feel sort of hostile towards. We engage in various conditioning factors based upon our afflictions of like anger and so forth. And so this is the way in which we then proceed from that fundamental ignorance to conditioning factors to consciousness, which in turn give rise to name and form, and then the 6 sense bases, then contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, birth, and aging and death. So we see how it is that we proceed through this. And so it says, likewise, you contemplate the arising of consciousness due to conditioning factors and so forth, how the latter factors of dependent arising arise from the former ones, looking at this process of how it goes forward, how each acts as a cause for what comes after it. And so then finally, you repeatedly contemplate and meditate on how sufferings such as aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, and so forth arise because of birth. And from this, you gain clear knowledge of cyclic existence, your successive rebirths in this cyclic existence due to karma and the afflictions, and become an expert regarding true origins, producing a desire to eliminate suffering and its causes. So here we need to repeatedly contemplate this such that we give rise to like a kind of felt sense of it, gain a kind of ascertainment. We're not just proceeding based upon assumptions, saying like, oh yeah, I know that, oh yeah, I know that, because that's not really going to help us. Rather, it is based upon our understanding of this causal process in a way that like relates to our own experience, that we can first give rise to a real understanding of what suffering is, looking at that kind of process by which we experience suffering and what our suffering nature is. We then, as it explains, through the reverse order of the afflicted side, then become an expert regarding true sufferings. And once we know suffering and we have this sense of, I want to get rid of that, we then investigate, well, what are the causes of that suffering? And once we find certainty that, yes, this is the cause of my suffering, we become, as it says here, an expert regarding true origins. And then we have not only that desire to eliminate suffering and its causes, but we also have the kind of knowledge by which we are able to properly identify those causes and make an effort to eliminate them.
Oh yeah, that is also. Oh, that is. Oh.
So our time is up for today, so we will stop there.
Oh yeah. That's it.
Thank you for making time for these teachings today, Geshe-la. And thank you, Katrina, for your beautiful translations. We'll finish with some dedication prayers. And thanks to Joshua and Diana also. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all our hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous action spread in the 10 directions. May the light of wholesome teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Gururatnam Andalakam Divyatayam. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh,
Dunja Jema Jeon Tuchana.
yeah.